Cyberpunk 2077. Released too early before it'd be too late. But despite it all, it's still stuck with me.
I saw in you what life was missing. You lit a flame that consumed my hate. I'm now one for reminiscing, but I traded all for your sweet embrace. 'Cause we lost everything. We had to pay the price. There's a canvas with two faces of fallen angels who loved and lost. It was a passion for the ages, but in the end, guess we paid the cost.
Cyberpunk 2077 started off with a delayed detonation and a flop. But as I'm writing this in advance, I'm confident the game is crawling its way out of the ditch that the players and execs tossed it in. I've disillusioned myself, but I'm unable to bring myself to pile on to this discussion, so no matter how many times I rewrite this very own script, I've decided to save my breath and paragraphs on the widely discussed topic. My respect for the developers themselves hasn't shattered, as I still enjoy their passionate inputs and enjoy their vision. I've played The Witcher 3, so I knew what to expect from them, and also I held back from knowing much about the game before release, so I avoided most conflict that is raised by the game's release with enough to sink in 200 hours. But it's also just because I love to submerge myself in story bits, characters and side activities made with care, and I think that's what makes it the world, not the mechanics. Because, as far as mechanics go, I have to be fair. As much as I've not known about the game before, I began research, I began writing the script and documenting gameplay, but I wasted so much time on a deep concept, deeply and carefully crafted foundation, overshadowed by the lack of visible care. Just as much the developers had to waste their energy and potential to try and fulfill a bold and ironic lie. A false promise from a corporate entity that housed the soul, but at the helm had someone with shit for brains. Version 3, where I refused to just completely eliminate my efforts, but just mention what was good and end it there. At the Corpo's start, V felt human. Not much of a soul-sucking parasite in a rat's nest, but a human being in there by choice or adaptive survival. The first scene, workplace stress, or whatever it was, it opened the immediate question of what and why, so what it showed, it was a bit offsetting, where the body negatively reacts to a mentally straining lifestyle that V can continue to put up with his self-imagined walls around, because of the unspoken rule inside the corporate structure. I became sympathetic towards V as a character of his own that exposed some of my own guilt from trying to be nice in V's body, saying all is fine as the issues just advance further, and you either accept it and seem fine, or seem on edge, which immediately struck me as this isn't going to be a character sheet with however far imagination leads as this V character. V, for as much as you're him, felt well written. The choices were there, but the tone was defined. There were starting issues for Corpo V, a pre-existing condition for a character, not apparent in other life paths, which is one way I can say V is unique, as bad as that may sound. The point just grew as me treating V as a separate individual and not like he is myself. Those choices for your tone may seem that they're not at all that impactful, but as soon as you take a detour from the main story, you find that you have choices that matter in terms of continuity, or breaking off developments and growing close to characters. Still, with all that could diverge, in this world that slowly kills you, there's closely realistic humanity in a dystopian world. Where do you think people with Chrome are losing their humanity and becoming more machine? But it's a discussion, a matter of perspective, and a matter of conditions. And that's probably why the cyberpunk world isn't so unbelievable. it's not as saturated as I expected with all the common gun advertising for families, the disturbing imagery, the easily replaceable flesh and common crime, and the sexual nature of so many ads. The world doesn't alienate people from being people, but it's made them ignorant, or just used to this world. Maybe not that it alienates people in this world per se, but it amplifies human tendency to land themselves in shit, lie, extort, manipulate for power, money, influence, recognition, and ascension, actions taken much less out of goodwill. There's enough sympathetic, caring, and relatable characters, as well as some disgusting, mysterious, or understandably ruined characters. Different mixtures of motivations and perspectives. It's saturated at least in variety, but not so far in beliefs, and if anything, it actually questions your beliefs, be it spiritual or existential. Like The Witcher 3, Cyberpunk 2077 builds on top of a foundation, staying pretty loyal to the formula, but iterating upon it their own interesting ways and putting in the work to realize all that previously has just been imagined or conceptualized. Ironic how we're seeing an interesting concept be this disappointing, ending up being a sweet lie where the player is the same outsider in the city of dreams. Or ironic how the game touches and teaches upon those things, explores that concept of a world taken by corporations. Corporations can already grow larger than governments, and some apparently can create their monopoly of control through other means than power of arms. All because of dependencies or luxury, so they'd eventually be forgiven. Even if and when this is all a normality, this dystopian future, there are still things darker in that world that can unsettle the player, from the stories of goodwill gone sour, insane crimes and subjugations, not just simple murder, but creepy ways of expression from an artist or fan even, to some messed up overworld political mind-controlling Illuminati powers watching you, V, still having nutjobs on the streets spewing some insanity so it all sounds so silly, so you're likely to disregard it. Oh, and they even give you an option to disregard. How nice, how convenient. Are they devs? Of course, there are those theories, and just thoughts. There are opinions and perspectives on this world that go against each other, and it all layers on top, from small conversations between two people to large corporations pushing pawns in politics and waging wars more dreadful than a country could make up in that time. For the writers to craft a world where it doesn't steer some specific messaging all the way home, like, oh, it's so bleak or whatever, but rather crafts every response and side having conflicting ideologies, conflicting perspectives, is what I can really commend, where I can see the effort put in, and where it's just not going to ever get the praise it deserves in that area because of the compromises. There's just so much to dig into, and that's where I can find more value for myself. Of course, it takes a little energy, and not everyone's willing to spend it that way. Some just want to unwind. And I like to spend the time researching, finding out, and exploring unfamiliar concepts and get the fix of a deeply crafted world. At least I gain a perspective from this as the player, separate from V, discovering what the developers want us to know, that they've carefully woven into the world. The cyberpunk subgenre itself certainly gives a perspective from the new wave origins and all the way to the tabletop RPG inspiration, and I think sci-fi helps break up ignorance by masking that literature and roleplay as entertainment. We stop asking questions, imagining and wondering about the future in a variety of perspectives, and humanity begins a steady self-destructive decline, because ignorance kills concepts. Or at least opens a door for manipulators to take advantage and sink the concept exploitatively for their own gain. Wink, wink. To the smallest level, a choice of origin matters, but overall it doesn't, as all roads submerge through one unifying friend, Jackie. The guy that's friendly on his good side, tough on his bad side, and most certainly a big dreamer under it all. But luckily, our story's good friend. So much for the prologue being short, but the paths aligning could have been more than a quick montage, because it felt like a cheap way to push together two characters, and that's not even the issue, because Jackie is likable, but the problem is that Jackie didn't get the screen time he deserved. The montage itself isn't bad, the music isn't bad, but the decision to just play out a montage is the mistake. We lose him due to the city's nature of a false promise and have to dwell on that until we once again meet people to get close through circumstance to heal those old wounds, but we never got to know him as it's suggested through a small montage that we know him the way V does. Still, because of the optional events after, the whole setting around Jackie's departure was crafted well in making a setting you can dwell in and stick around longer. Only now learning things you never knew about him, and getting to know friends that all just pay their silences due. That event through a piece of entertainment, a non-physical interaction where there is distance and disconnect from the viewer and the content, it still hits you in the gut. It hit me hard. Hit me even worse because I was there only on the second playthrough. What makes a dystopian humanity and what makes it work with all the technological advancement, that now is a great mixture for this humanity suggesting virtual mind capture, projection, hijacking, and display, it all slowly developed a thought that I'm an imposter in V's body, like Johnny, because as much as there is choice given V voices as their own, the game does go in themes of questioning about you and Johnny's harm to each other, how these two psyches sharing a single body could make it seem that V's losing control over his own decisions, and V is a character of his own, with his own tone, ambitions and goals, will to survive, and now we, the player, make the choice over him, with V and Johnny wondering how far can you lose control and never realize it. Sure, there are the main themes of fuck corpos, fuck brainwashed sheep, fuck extremists, and fuck everything, everything's shit, and everyone's depressed, and that makes Cyberpunk, but I think where the developers have made incredible effort is in making the gray area. When a dystopia would be greatly saturated and unbelievable to look at, I wouldn't take that seriously. Sure, we could eventually fuck up our own world to the point of no return, but splashing a bit of reality of the light and dark in this future dystopia creates a similarity to be closer to what we see on the streets today, to tell us quite frankly how close we actually are to being fucked. And that's not where it stops. What's the worst, most dehumanizing thing that could happen to a human being, or worse, who could subject another human to something so horrific? Stripping a human from their own right to live, to decide, to be taken control without even knowing, essentially being hijacked, losing yourself, your own self, and not knowing it. Not being able to distinguish your personal self from just a copy of you. All of that now being possible and in the hands of anyone with power to play God. The sound of fear in the discussion about losing yourself without ever knowing, it's why I can't let go of that hijacker thought, and either the game does greatly at hiding these themes, or this wasn't the game's offsetting intention even, cause it's just a playable game about existential problems. Making one great dysfunctional society that by appearance is similar to the real world, to our time now. It's where this game succeeds at depressing me. But it kind of excites me to maybe finally have an artificial spine so I can straighten my back more than once in a blue moon. Exploring the world by foot and vehicle is also incredibly satisfying gameplay-wise because all the themes fit to spend the time getting to the destination, and not always do you need to reach a destination, you just explore. There's of course the choice for comfort to just get to a destination by fast travel. The option's there, but the ride is so enjoyable, where you could say driving with cars isn't great, but with bikes I loved it. The first time I got to ride on a bike I stole from a gang, I could ride all around without any pressure and just in that moment take in all of Night City. All of the different sites of the various places are unique, all the different places have their own feel. Near Megacorps it's really just eerie and cold. City alleys are bumfull and all those out of sight corners are filled with trash due to the human nature. And around poverty-stricken camps there is so little identity. So much of it is public trash and public space with no corner for privacy of their own. Wherever the developers have had the chance and time to put in their touch, there is an absolutely great mix of detail and character for those streets that separate style and living conditions between each. This game has an incentive to survive. The stakes are set, they're effective, but the incentive is this thin and breakable fabric that for a solid story is a pitfall. but for experiencing side activities that there are so many of is more viable. Where the illusion of pressure may not be effective, setting up the stakes and red herrings is effective to drive the player on different stories seamlessly. Where there may have been an interest in the beginning, you can and most likely will follow through even when there's nothing more for you in terms of survival. Evelyn Parker's story would have been an actually great lead as a main quest that turned into a side quest. A quest to save yourself becomes a quest of personality and personal work, nothing to do with you, the dying star of the show. The whole focus shifts around from you and Evelyn to Judy, the one unhinged girl willing to serve justice without much of a plan, like how someone we know likes it. Strangely enough, Johnny didn't see that in her, but there's a whole lot of change in his character too. You come to like or dislike one, but Judy is hard to dislike, also hard to know and hard to help, because the more she loses people close to her, beliefs dear to her, you're made the only thing she still has hope in, and your outcome is an impact in her either furthering suffocation in the city, or either breaking off to end all this misery, or finally you getting out of the mess of Night City by not relying on the Night City's offer. Johnny eventually came to like Judy as well. He didn't see eye to eye with her in the beginning, when similarly Judy's just as unhinged and high to serve that justice, minus the obnoxiousness and
an impressive cock.
Be it the unchangeable force of the game that Evelyn would die, but there's just unspoken guilt that I neither would want to bring on Judy or would want to admit. So I was propped in this situation to either do this ending right, which I didn't on my first playthrough, or eventually do enough for the bitter reality to get to her core. Where there is one somber character living in a darker street or corner, Goro is one living an honorable and somewhat meaningful life. Well, before. Not so much that I feel responsible for the whole loss of his job, but it was out of nowhere that Takamura would do something as out of line as saving us, and even if we would have managed to crawl out of the dump by ourselves without that intervention, at least he capped decks. Not so much that my motivation aligned with his, but even with the difference, there are respectable goals and characteristics that made us close. I felt that either spin on the character, either origin, the writers made great effort to make the differences in characters each be unique, but also click so well to motivate the player. What's admirable in Takamura is that strength and drive for morals in a world with seemingly none, but also an outdated look on the outer world and outdated understanding in tech that makes for a fun interaction that elevate the whole aspect of texting and calling these characters. There are more threads than this, of course, Takamura is bizarrely being the most successful in prompting something from the insane heist of a plan to just talk, getting something to cling on to, but the other threads, even if dead ends, turn into side quests that are just absolutely worth your time for what the game is. Panam and her path being so much fun packed into Nomads, with an ending as grand for helping and being the best of endings. Out of all the sacrifice that had to be made and still should be respected, they're close, they do things more at ease and make it all seem simple, but it works because they're independent from the city. Meeting all these people, walking down their paths, and making worthy connections through it all, Johnny's just there. Rarely does he intervene during your encounters with the Nomads, because I feel he learns the best from those he hasn't viewed in much of a regard, for never really leaving the city himself. The usual critic of our actions felt like he was learning behind the scenes, the rocker boy psycho fucker who had amassed a following of crackheads that would likely never get past the music to see his messaging or get them to take action. Johnny at least did something. Amassed some sort of active following at least, but there was so much more to compensate for when his movement lacked manpower. No matter how big the damage he could deal, the corpos could have their spin on the little pawn of theirs and, if anything, label him a terrorist and then sell music in his name. Feels somewhat like how Bartmoss lit the fuse and fragmented the net, doing the most he can for change but going lights out and now being blamed for how others have taken advantage of that, which was intended in goodwill. Anyway, the way it gets personal through Johnny's story through his whole choice questline and then going on another tangent with Carrie is not only an interesting insight for the crew, but it has opened up and changed Johnny during the ending bit, where in the first playthrough I would try to be content with him, but he would constantly remind me of my failures, constantly tell me how wrong I am, and it was so strange to actually get a good foothold with Johnny. Felt good that he kept a fairly critical attitude but cared this time. The first playthrough I did, I took the most soulless and selfish path, marching towards death out of tunnel vision, and finished my story as a corpo with a nail in the coffin of an ending. Being stuck in some space terminal and going back to Earth with nothing and no one. This game, at least, made a greater effort at teaching you how appealing immortality and interaction can actually be. In terms of replayability, Cyberpunk 2077 is me learning to be more careful by going down this one path with a double take on a situation and a perspective shift. For example, the whole conflict with Voodoo Boys is one that takes you as the fool no matter what, but which option would be better? I still didn't want to side with Netwatch during my next playthrough. At the crossroads and listening to the agent this time actually ended up sounding reasonable. Their effort makes sense, but there's always an ulterior motive, a tactic to use and abuse. It's two sides wishing their goodwill for their greater goods, one of current safety and the other for future safety, but both sides are fucking assholes. Lesser evil still evil, but in Cyberpunk the pressure and the gun in your hand is all the evil you may ever need to make all the wrong choices. Voodoo Boys want freedom of the net, no matter the danger, and possibly think they can only advance in a world of free AI, not considering it to be rogue AI like Netwatch would. Then again, they'd have the advantage if they were more prepared for the breach, because both sides know it will happen. That said, of course, Netwatch considers VBs a rogue organization, with them carving their ground in Pacifica after the funding pullouts. It's at least one unified house for them to live under, and they have to pull their own weight and push back enemies from their doorstep. To others, they're invaders. To themselves, they're survivors by becoming this incredibly dangerous edgerunner group. I thought as V we could come to terms, but the only reason we're alive with either siding with Netwatch or Voodoo Boys is because of the chip, so this is where we couldn't blame Johnny for being a parasite. Because as much as that chip is a curse, we'd be dead already by a stray bullet or some fried circuits. It didn't sit well when Voodoo Boys were so ready to get rid of me, but I still agreed with the message of a free net. As rogue AIs may be, they're only considerably rogue if we're talking about megacorps. To the public, they'd mean our connection to tech can be dangerous or actually liberating, which means the death of flesh. Like a large plague taken over, but technology is our internal issue of dependency. Being prepared for a free net is essential, and Voodoo Boys are the ones taking the right steps. I understand their distrust, but they still would have killed me, so no matter how unfair and how disposable I was in that situation, how lucky I may have been with the chip, I never saw it right to either betray Voodoo Boys or kill them out of revenge, even if I can. The game gives you all the chance and choice to fuck them over, force karma down their throat, leave them dead to their weakest. But without Voodoo Boys playing their own interest, having the ability to shake up the core, we're nothing to megacorps. The shitty part is treading the line of war and imbalance, because war is profitable for megacorps even if there is loss. Because after the war, all that rubble is free to claim for megacorps that are as giant as Arasaka. It may have been heavily hit by what Johnny and other insurgents may have done, but it also only freed up more lots for Arasaka to rebuild in. More human leverage points to use in guild tripping. Just imagine Arasaka may have received a heavy blow, but they're still to this day holding higher ground, at least in space, than Militech. For my second playthrough, I have a small sense of grief that only by replaying events that in real life would have been just a one-time window, I'm able to find so many important pieces I've been missing. Makes me a real shitty human being for not attending Jackie's funeral, to have a long conversation with Misty that even when I was a corpo trash, she took care of me without ever asking for another word. Where I got to see Vic more during that and in a different event in boxing. Seeing him smile was just awesome as this really reserved guy. Got Misty to be at the funeral and let old wounds heal between Misty and Mama Wells. I regret not seeing it all the first time. Barry's the same. If I hadn't been trying to take care of him more than the basic, oh people die, you gotta deal with it, and just quickly go back to doing missions, I'd meet the most common outcome there is. I absolutely love how Cyberpunk 2077 hides its sinister substance in environments, messages, and conversations that are held between AI. People can go in completely guns blazing, take the one mission objective, and leave, regardless if they were told it's a harsh job. But if you tuned in on what the fuck is going on here and there, you'd learn some things that put up a bit of a dark perspective on things. Gangs being disguised as Militech to wage war and conflict and be disposed of is one thing I can note off my head, or a missing worker that had tried curing her sister with drugs in a basement, only making the sister more insane and thinking for years she's being drugged to be a subservient little sis. Then all around the house you see signs of someone losing their mind, wailing for help and not trusting the only help they got, until one moment they snap and all that's left is a drugged girl out of her mind with one big sword lunged in the back of her sister and the other one lunging at you. The whole encounter was just plain fucking and creepy, the ones that get me jumpy just from context because I read so much before encountering the person in question. The gameplay's still the same and moves I've seen before, as she's agile but mainly uses melee and can be dodged, but because I knew what I was dealing with and the set dressing was so dark, I actually felt petrified of the job I had to do. I'm satisfied with the story, moreover with the lore and implications, having a fresh experience, change of pace, and much more to learn. No doubt, no concern, no issue is ever raised about the sound of the game, and I understand why. The music, the environment, actions, responses, and voice acting in this game, all from head to toe, are exceptionally done, exceptionally handpicked and implemented, like animations with sound effects. It's smooth, crisp, the sounds align with the profile so well. Of course, sometimes it can break. Engine sounds and races can melt you, the OSTs kicking in the story moments, and the ending can melt you, and when those little clicks, clonks, and spins a gun makes with animations on the first pickup happen, you notice it immediately, like a well-edited montage of every frame and music note aligning perfectly for every cut and transition to be on key. You can notice and hear great work being put into it, and in that universe you're able to wholly submerge yourself in the city's sounds, the drowning crowds in the streets and calming silence of the outskirts. It's all impressive sound design on its own without having to mention or supplement it with music, but god damn the music.
Chiseled with intent from the smallest of cells, the immaculate entanglement. Chromosome double X, the hidden realm, her element.
Danger pretty here in our city. Here in our city.
Suffer for me, friend in need. The one thing that I just can't be.
I was surprised what type of music I could hear in that city with the disabled copyrighted music option even on, because rarely is there ever more than okay music under no copyright to be able to use. All the types of music genres each have their decent and outshining pieces. Each artist has to put work in their pieces to the point where I've heard everything at least once and have built a mental library of my favorites. But that music isn't just amazing music for the player to listen, because for the clubs, the scattered radios and public spaces, all you can hear is so well done that I can't really explain it, but I can feel the immense depth and effort put into how the game sounds. Cyberpunk 2077 must have had huge investment in sound design and the music to be created for the world or licensed to use, because the music selection alone at times of just driving around makes you waste more time not doing anything but driving around and jamming. That has made for some extremely awesome or calming feelings depending on the music and aimless fun. So what was I on about? Oh yeah, sound equal good. Your legacy as V in the world is about how you affected things and how they changed. One obvious change is the story, the friends you met along the way that you met through missions, but the other thing entirely for that legacy are the things outside of that main big bubble of saving your life, or rather V's life. Side quests and random activities where you did something out of choice and where you followed through for a character is where the game and the devs set small but very nice reminders of what you went through and how you went through with people. It's a dystopian world where the city would eat you to the bone with taking everything and giving nothing back, but the people you meet give your stay purpose, as your encounter gives them some development and there's this exchange of meaning. It's sorta the legacy a human would leave behind for no monetary value but emotional one, as V can reach this major league overflowing with eddies and opportunities, but nothing compares to the connections you made along the way. Well, it's still a pick your poison kind of scenario. So the smallest but most warming progression is V saving those moments in the apartment where each trinket is a reminder of something that you chose to do and chose to impact and be impacted by. The whole game to me, and seemingly by certain choice for V, is that one sentence you tell Claire about the journey, not the destination. Which is why I would say that no ending other than the solo storming of Arasaka or the raid by the Nomad clan is one of the better bittersweet endings that considerably are the best endings in a dystopian world. Which is where I would disagree that V needs a happy ending. The Witcher 3's DLCs never left much of a happy ending, they left an impact and an open moral question. One that sticks to your judgment. Everybody wants a happy ending, but neither of the worlds crafted by CDPR's developers are forgiving ones. They craft a game that leaves a pretty harsh impact on you, among the seas of other meaningful and meaningless games that have their bright colors, simple time sinks, and happy endings that you don't learn much from. Cyberpunk 2077 is the game that didn't deliver what was expected, but it delivered a great story, a decent game. In conclusion, Cyberpunk, it's good.
Held the base and descended from proverbial hells, attached to memory like scars on the flesh, seemingly retracing these steps, cause history keeps repeating itself, and we faded instead, chiseled with intent from the smallest of cells, the immaculate entanglement, chromosome double X, the hidden realm her element.